I think that's what people want anyway. They've always wanted a live show between the three of us, but a debate between the two of you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live stream with myself, Pyotr Kurzin, host of the Geopolitics and Global Gambit, Michael Rossi, or Professor Michael Rossi, expert on transcribing and translating Russian directly, and host of his fantastic YouTube channel, and Professor James Lindsay, expert on statehood, conflict, and international relations, I think, right, James? Many different things. We are coming to you from quite a few different places. I will premise by saying that I have a very unstable connection. I'm currently in Corfu, Greece, but it seems to have the quality of internet of sort of Angola. And so it may well be that I have to drop out at some point, and this will leave you for James and Michael to go at it. As in, they'll probably have debate and start arguing, and I won't be there to moderate it. So that could be fun. I'm kidding. I'm sure they have a good conversation regardless. But I think we want to talk about Azerbaijan and Armenia, right?
Yes.
And then we want to shift towards Ukraine.
Yes.
To be honest, is all I'm focused on at the moment. Azerbaijan, Armenia is interesting, but not something I've talked about much, other than Putin has simply lost out completely. That's a video I put out, 2-3 weeks ago. But I don't know, maybe, Michael, why don't we start with you? You're coming to us from your cousin's dacha, I think you said.
Yes, hence the nature outside here. I mean, I think the most important thing that we can take away from what's been happening right now regarding Armenia and Azerbaijan is that this was largely coordinated by Donald Trump. And this is sort of the bridge into what we'll be talking about regarding Ukraine, because say what you want about Trump as a president, let alone as a human being, but he's been having a successful last couple of days, at least as far as he's concerned. And, the agreement, which is not yet set in stone, but it's something that gets the two countries talking, has certainly caused a lot of questions, particularly in Armenia, because no one really knows what was ultimately agreed on, except for the idea that the Zanzibar corridor is effectively signed off to the United States for 99 years. And what this does is, and I read this somewhere quite succinctly, Armenia gives a piece of its territory to Donald Trump to allow Azerbaijan to drive through. And it connects Azerbaijan proper with the Nakhchivan sort of exclave to Armenia's west, and then continues on into Turkey. We would assume that what this also means is that Armenia and Azerbaijan establish diplomatic relations, open up economic ties, and this might, spill over into the border opening up with Turkey as well. What's missing in this agreement was any mention at all over the fate of Nagorno Karabakh or the people that were displaced from it. There's this open-ended statement by Pashinyan, who had said something to the effect of, well, Azerbaijan has territory that Armenia wants, or Armenia has territory that Azerbaijan wants. We can talk about this sort of down the road. I sincerely doubt this is going to do anything in alleviating what Armenia lost in Karabakh. And it seems like the big winner in all of this, first and foremost, is the United States, followed number 2 by Azerbaijan, Turkey kind of riding the coattails in number 3. Russia seems to be left out of the whole thing. And then the biggest losers are either Armenia, if we don't know what they get, and Iran, which is now cut off from Armenia by territory that the United States effectively controls. So I would say good couple of days for my president.
Okay, Pyotr, I'm going to take a slightly different view on this, because I think.
Look, here we go. The combustion starts, right?
Not a vastly different view. I mean, look. I mean, Trump will get the plaudits that he got Aliyev and Pashinyan into the White House to sign the deal. I think the point to get across is that a large amount of the work had already been done by the two sides themselves. This wasn't some great act of mediation. This wasn't a Camp David Accord or anything like that. I think as Michael had mentioned, that the really big breakthrough was this question of this transport link between Azerbaijan proper and Nakhchivan, which is this exclave that is divided off from the rest of Azerbaijan by Armenian territory. And Azerbaijan was very, very keen to make sure that it got the link, but it was a huge sticking point. Azerbaijan wanted that to be some sort of sovereign corridor that it controlled, and Armenia quite simply said, no, that's not going to happen. And the great innovation, as Michael had pointed out, but it was an innovation that wasn't developed by Trump.
Yes.
Interestingly, the talks had started under the Biden administration, is for an American-controlled corridor. And this will be quite a significant step, because the corridor itself will not just be a road corridor. They're actually talking about a rail link. They're talking about fiber optic link. So this will really integrate those two parts of Azerbaijan much, much more closely. But as was also pointed out, I mean, this is, if you look at the map, there is a tiny, tiny bit of border that links Turkey into Nakhchivan. And then this will provide a link, and then across Azerbaijan to the Caspian, and then to Central Asia, which is obviously an area that Turkey is incredibly keen to build its relations with. So, this is certainly a significant win for Azerbaijan in many ways, but it's done within the bounds of Armenia's red lines on sovereignty. I think the other thing to just point out, and oh, by the way, the link, I won't call it a corridor as such, but the link will be known as TRIP. So the Trump route for international peace and prosperity.
Yes.
Yeah. How about that? It really
the Donald Trump highway.
Yeah. It really is, but I mean, on another point, I mean, there are other issues as well. I mean, the two haven't quite, haven't settled their border. They've been working on demarcating that. That's already seen some territorial swaps. It seems to be progressing well. But the really key thing, which could yet scupper this whole thing, is that Azerbaijan is absolutely adamant that as part of any final agreement, that Armenia has to change its constitution to renounce any claim to Azerbaijani territory. So essentially, it must no longer claim Nagorno Karabakh. And part of the argument is that because Azerbaijan is so adamant about this, that this could yet see any referendum on constitutional change to that effect defeated. So the plan is to try and do that by 2027. So it's not going to be happening immediately, but it is a really, really important sticking point for Azerbaijan. So this may yet come tumbling down. But I think what we can say so far is that Pashinyan seems committed to this deal. As Michael said, there's no mention of Nagorno Karabakh, but I think that, effectively we can take it that Nagorno Karabakh now, as far as Armenian official policy, and certainly Armenian official policy under this government is no longer. It renounced its claim to independence, well over 18 months ago now. It doesn't exist anymore on paper, or even, certainly not in any political sense. But there is the big question of, could people return if they wanted to? I think it's probably very unlikely that any Armenians would want to return. I don't think they would feel particularly safe. And importantly, Baku and Aliyev have made it absolutely clear there will be no special deal for autonomy for Nagorno-Karabakh. So anyone returning will simply have to return to live under standard Azerbaijani law, with maybe some sort of cultural rights to be negotiated. So I think, it's certainly a very big step forward, a positive step forward, but it isn't quite the issue solved completely as yet.
Okay. Yes, sorry, as I said, my connection is spotty, so if I have to drop out, I probably will do so. But I think that, Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize, but for the time being, he got himself a corridor, right? That is really quite cringy, that nickname or the acronym, I have to be honest. I think these two have largely come to a agreement on long-standing issues since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. What I think is also important is that this is a formal request to disband the Minsk group, right, which was established in '92 to mediate Nagorno Karabakh. And given the fact that it seems to be largely dealt with, shall we say, I think that's probably going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Azerbaijan is absolutely the winner out of this. The only thing I'm glad is that it's not sort of more of an encroachment on Armenia's sovereignty. I was very worried at one point that Armenia was just sort of going to be, well, essentially pincer movement, because Russia was not going to come to their support. Turkey and Azerbaijan were looking pretty audacious. And I think what is also worth keeping in mind is just how much Turkey does have its fingerprints on this. I think Turkey and the US administration, Trump administration, have definitely been doing more behind the scenes on it, much like we saw with the collapse of the Assad regime, right? In the run up to that, Turkey was quite clearly aware of the intelligence and the events that were going to happen with the overthrowing then. And I think Turkey's very keen to see this corridor expand. It's obviously great economics for them. And also because relative to, say, Iran, which is a net loser in this Turkey is a winner, and they get to, how should we say, export their sphere of influence even further, which, if that means crossing over even as far as Iran, then that benefits them, because it's also, it connects quite neatly up to the stands. We've talked about the Turkish organization that they're really pushing in the stand states, right, James? So, yes. Well, and Michael, you've been based out there, so I think Turkey's definitely a big indirect winner of this as well. And I think
one thing that we need, one thing we need to we shouldn't forget is Turkey aided Azerbaijan significantly in its retaking of Karabakh. And as much as Erdogan likes to push this idea of fraternal brotherhood between Turks and Azerbaijanis, that's for the camera. And behind the scenes, Aliyev has been told how much he owes Ankara. And so there's a bill of sale that comes with this. So the opening of the corridor and having it start and end, depending upon your viewpoint, in Eastern Turkey is certainly something that Erdogan wanted, and that Aliyev is more than happy to oblige. The big issue, and something that, I was in Armenia a few months ago, and surprisingly, I saw very little graffiti, any comments, any statements from people about the loss of Karabakh. There was no major protests against Pashinyan's rule. He certainly has not made a lot of friends in Armenia, and he is still, trying to clamp down on anybody that he sees as a challenge to his leadership. Cementing this with the United States certainly gives him some leeway. It gives him some protection. If nothing else, it gives him a flight out of the country. But the issue with Karabakh is beyond the loss of the territory and the expulsion of more than 100,000 Armenians, was always this understanding that Karabakh was something that Armenia proper rhetorically supported, but never openly, let's say, recognized. They didn't offer military support during the Azerbaijani Karabakh War of 2020. Armenia never recognized the independence of Karabakh. It always was this open-ended issue that Russia had sort of tabled and said, we'll work with its status at some point down the road. This was the Minsk, sort of the Minsk agreements that had said at some point we're going to figure out what its situation was. Although Russia always recognized that Karabakh would be within the sovereign territory of Azerbaijan. So best agreement would have been some kind of autonomous region with direct links to Armenia. Here is where, empirical evidence gives way towards a lot of presumption and radio chatter. And that is, even before Pashinyan became prime minister, was the realization that at some point Karabakh is going to have to be let go of. They can't hold on to it. There's no way that they don't have the global support for it. And yes, they're able to keep Azerbaijan at bay, but it's just a matter of time before fortunes reverse themselves, which it did. And whether Pashinyan decides that he was going to be the prime minister to let it go in exchange for other things, in exchange for greater economic relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan and, new opportunities with the West, is something that, we'll never really find out unless Pashinyan openly, says what's on his mind. He's been very, very quiet about this agreement, but, as I've already said, he and his family are most likely taken care of. The playback from Armenia is going to be rather interesting. And because this was just a couple of days ago, I know that many in Armenia are saying that, Armenia is signing away its sovereignty. So instead of giving it to Azerbaijan, we're giving it to the United States. Either way, we have no control over our border with Iran. Iran has now been sort of fenced in, at least as far as that border is concerned. I wouldn't count Iran out. People tend to think that Iran keeps losing every single time. They're still around, and they still are, going to be an interesting player in all of this. What's also interesting, and I agree with James, is this idea that this agreement can still be scuttled in numerous ways. This could not be accepted within the Armenian parliament. If Pashinyan is given a vote of no confidence and a new party comes in that's completely scraps the deal, we're right back to square one. But what remains right now is that this has been at least the first step in resolving one of the longest running frozen conflicts since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and gives Trump ultimately what he wants, and that is recognition for ending something that, he was not. I can't imagine that Trump would come up with any of these ideas himself. James is absolutely correct in that this is something that had been negotiated on much earlier, but it gives him the boost that he wants, and as many people as possible nominating him for this Nobel Peace Prize, which he absolutely wants, is, all the better. Which is a good segue into our, if we want to pivot towards Putin and Trump and Ukraine, we can certainly do that.
By the way, I just to mention that of course this isn't the only peace agreement that Trump has sort of been there, for when the flashes and the photography is taking place. Remembering, of course, that a few weeks ago we had the agreement signed in Democratic Republic of Congo as well, which was another sort of. I think one of those issues where it was, I think in that one, it's far less certain it's going to hold, because there is any number of groups in Eastern Congo which are fighting, and this is just one part of the overall picture. But I think it is certainly interesting to also mention that, on the one hand, sort of everyone's laughing about sort of Trump and this sort of single-minded desire of his to get the Nobel Peace Prize. But on the other hand, that we are now seeing two things that he has quite clearly had some sort of involvement in, that have sort of come to some sort of fruition. Yeah. How long it's going to last, whether it's going to break up, is obviously the sort of big question. But it is interesting that he's also spotting opportunities to be involved. But of course, as you said, the big question is, what does all this now mean for Ukraine, with the fact that there is this meeting coming up in Alaska as we're speaking, in about 5 or 6 days' time? Yep. So what are you expecting from it?
So before we get into the specifics about the Ukraine thing, you mentioned Congo, you mentioned we've been talking about Armenia, Azerbaijan. what this also, and I think the viewers should, know about, and I think you'll agree with me on this, right? Is that these are great examples of how long and prolonged conflict resolution agreements happen to be, right? You don't just meet in one summit, sign a piece of paper, and think that everything is fine. What it ultimately does is keeps the dialogue going, and it sets people up for additional agreements down the road. I think that this is something that Pashinyan is hoping for, at least in terms of settling, old business that he knows that was just sitting on his desk, dealing with Azerbaijan in this way, and then deciding what, where to go afterwards. That's, really for, future agreements to come out. When it comes to Ukraine, now here's where the interesting part comes in, because the agreement came after Witkoff went to Moscow, and Moscow's response was that the Americans have offered us something that we can agree with, right? Which Russia has been very clear about what they want in ending the war in Ukraine, which is territorial concessions, Ukraine's permanent neutrality, and leadership in Kiev that is much more favorable to Moscow. Right? This is a tall order to make. Even just if we factor in just the territorial concessions, we know this is something that Ukraine is not going to agree to. They have the backing of the majority of the European Union. So what was it that got Russia to say, all right, let's meet with Trump? So what we can surmise is that Trump may have agreed for the territorial concessions. And we hear
distraction.
It could be.
He's a distraction from his domestic shit, and well, Trump has his own interests at heart. Let's be honest, Michael.
Okay, but still, even before Epstein,
it's slightly tongue in cheek, Michael, but I want to jump in because I think that the meeting is coming at an interesting time for Putin. It's coming at an interesting time for the European Union, particularly. There have been a few trips that the Europeans have been making that I don't think get half as much attention as the showbizman that is Trump, right? Think about it. When Trump isn't in the news, he doesn't do well. If he's in the news, then he gets to control the narrative. He gets to control the prevailing sense of perspective that people have. That's why whenever he benefited from the media cycle in the run-up to the election last year, it was statistically proven that whenever Trump was in the headlines dominating the narrative, it benefited his poll points. So I think that if he can try to control what's going on in foreign policy, then that will benefit him ultimately in his domestic reputation, which is taking a hit at the moment. Also, the economic situation in the US is, well, it's not as bad as Europe, but it's getting wobbly, right? There are recession looms, people talking of continued concerns about immigration as well. There's a lot going on that Trump is not getting a hold of. And his emphasis of trying to broker peace deals in Cambodia and Thailand, between India and Pakistan, and also now this pretty big deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia, I think is emblematic of his, I won't say desperate, but his quite keen attempts to get wins where he can, right? I think it's... James?
No, I mean, if I can just sort of come in and say, I mean, what I find really, really disturbing about trying to deal with Trump is this utter uncertainty that at any moment you think you've got him into an understanding with his allies, and then he just blows it out the water. So it's been, we well remember that horrific moment in the White House with Zelensky, where he was completely humiliated by Trump. And then you saw months and months of patient work by NATO allies to try and get the Americans back on board. You think you've got Trump sort of, he's making the right noises. You had that move by Hegseth to cut arms sales to Ukraine, and then suddenly that was improved again, and then it just suddenly became really quite. Sorry, the tapping is really loud at my end, by the way. it's yeah. So you just suddenly had this sort of move by Hegseth to cut it off. Trump said, no, we're going to restart everything. It looked as though it was really, suddenly everything was back on track. Then what do you know, Witkoff goes to Moscow, and then suddenly you've got this meeting again. And I just don't know what to make of any of this. I was about to say any more, but I don't think any of us have ever known what to make of it all. It seemed that Trump had turned against Moscow, that he was taking a much tougher line. And then suddenly you've got this announcement and this real sense that a deal is going to be done behind, or an attempted deal is going to be done behind Ukraine's back. And of course, you do get into that situation that Trump thinks he's got an agreement with Putin, and then he'll just say to Ukrainians, take it or leave it. Mm-hmm. And you know what leaving it means. And that's the real problem. So I can imagine, and JD Vance being in the UK at the moment, you know, he had a meeting with David Lammy, the British Foreign Secretary. Apparent this weekend that they've had European leaders trying to speak to the US Vice President to really get the point across. And I think, you know, to take a step back and look at the big picture, the thing that really, really worries me in all of this is that we come back to this point that there's talk of territorial concessions. What does that mean? You know, people have spoken about, you know, maybe land exchanges, but of course, there's no way that Russia is going to give up territory that was part of Russia before this war. So effectively, what are we talking about? Ukraine, Crimea.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that they want to try to force Ukraine to give up Crimea because it's been part of Russia for longer, or Russia controlled it for longer since 2014. The eastern, it's also more clearly separate. It's always been slightly different to the eastern parts of Donbass, right? Again, I'm not talking from a point of favoritism. I'm simply stating about the reality, right? I think it's very difficult to see that Ukraine has any ability to dictate terms to Trump. And I'm rather concerned that these two are going to do some kind of backdoor deal, that is Putin and Trump, if Ukraine doesn't play ball at all. From the latest article I read on the way here earlier, Zelensky will probably be in Alaska as well, but he might and unlikely will be in the same room. So I don't really know how you have a three-way trilateral meeting without the third party, of which is obviously the main party and the one concerned. But again, you know, both of you know that this is what resemblant of how Trump sees the world, which is great power politics, might is right. Forget the small guy and go straight to the important player, which is Putin. I think also the Trump-Putin personal relationship is very important in this, because regardless of Trump's more recent frustrations over Putin's behavior, he still, I think, has a fair amount of admiration, even idolization for Putin and his strongman tendencies. So I think if Trump and Putin get in the room together, I think it's going to be very different to what they're saying over the phone call. I think Trump's going to be quite sort of like smarmy and trying to put on. He's always a little bit softer with Putin. If you read his rhetoric, right, in tweets or any commentary, he's always slightly softer in the way that he refers to Putin. Even when he's pissed off, he's like, you know, my friend Vladimir or my comrade. And even if, you know, he doesn't talk about President Xi like that. He doesn't talk about other strongmen in the same way. So I'm very fearful that even if Ukraine is there, they're still going to try and force their hand in some form. Yeah. I don't know, Michael, what do you think?
I mean, you know, as I was saying before, Russia has a very clear position on what it wants in terms of a negotiated settlement. And that is not just Crimea, but all 5 regions, all 5. Now, if Trump agrees to all of that, great. You know, what's in it for Trump? You know, what does he get in return for that? There's other things that could possibly be within the discussion, chief of which is Ukraine is not the only thing that's going to be discussed in Alaska, but the resumption of U.S.-Russian bilateral relations, yes, economic deals, business deals. This is ultimately what it is. Look at what transpired with Armenia, right? What ends up happening? The United States effectively gains control over another country's territory. For Trump, this is a real estate deal. This is how he operates. Even when it comes to Gaza, he was even thinking of and surmising, well, if we won't give it to the Israelis, but we'll take it over. We'll turn it into a resort. For him, it's all about making money. And so in this regard, what does Trump get out of this, deal? Certainly not anything in Ukraine, unless we also know that as part of one of the other agreements made is that the United States does not give Ukraine a bill of sale for all the money that it lent them, but just simply, first dibs on all of Ukraine's minerals and raw materials, which effectively signs the country over to not just the U.S. itself, but to business consortiums, which for a fact many, many Trump allies are going to be beholden to. But as I was talking with James before, at one point when you had unfortunately conked out, is that these talks are really one of many stages in reaching a negotiated, an end solution to the conflict. The handshake between Pashinyan and Aliyev does not finish anything at all. The agreement that you're going to see, if there is an agreement at all, I wouldn't put money on this. There still might be that, they walk away on Ukraine because Trump thinks that he can get Putin to give up some of the territory that Russia has controlled. That's not going to happen. Right? That's simply not going to happen at all. But what we will see is at least a way of getting the United States to talk with Russia, isolating the European Union, which is, looking for attention, looking for relevancy. It's the only option that Zelensky has for some kind of defense. And I would not I'm sorry to say, I would not put much stock in the EU's leaders who, we were talking about people buttering up to, people with, a higher ego, Trump kind of, talking nice to Putin. I mean, James, you've seen it. Mark Rutte, was fawning over Trump at the NATO meeting. Ursula von Leyen basically handed the EU's economic sovereignty over to the United States. I mean, I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
It's pathetic.
And it's amazing, isn't it, that just how quickly these different events are taking place that we sort of forget various things. We forget that Ukraine just a few months ago signed a deal on resources with the Americans, which everyone thought, well, maybe. But, this is proving time and time again. And maybe Trump just can't be trusted. That is simply the reality of it, and people might say that as I'm taking an overtly political position. Maybe I am, but the reality is he cannot be trusted. That you think you've got to deal with him, and the next thing you know, he's opened up, and saying, well, I want to rewrite this, so I want to do that, So Ukraine thought they had a deal with Trump over the resources, and now Trump is going off and talking to Putin. What he did with the European Union, Michael, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think like many, many others, I was absolutely appalled at the way that the European Union responded. And I was trying to work out what was behind it. And the only thing I can think of is, well, two things. One is that sentimentality of believing that the relationship can still be salvaged as long as you just keep playing to Trump. But we know that every time you make a concession to Trump, he will just come back and he will be asking more. Just give it time. The second thing is the sheer worry that Trump would walk away on European security, that even though they thought they'd done all that work at NATO, even though you had Rutte and that ridiculous daddy comment, that maybe they felt that, if they didn't take steps to sign up to Trump's tariffs, then somehow Trump would just turn around and say, right, that's it, fine. I'm pulling US forces out of Europe. You're on your own. So that is the only logical explanation that I can find for why Europe gave in on that. And I think that highlights, again, just how far things have moved. And it was only a few months ago that we were all certain that America was walking away from NATO, that Europe was going to have to stand on its own 2 feet. Suddenly you have a successful NATO summit. It looks like the United States is back on board. And it just suddenly seems that Europe has lost that drive for strategic autonomy.
Yeah.
that it's suddenly thought, oh, everything's fine again. We don't need to worry about that. And then it's suddenly the tariffs. Oh, well, we haven't got plans in place for that strategic autonomy. So we've got to keep the Americans on board. And so, I think that what we're seeing is there will be a lot of Europeans who will be saying, oh, for God's sake, Europe, pull yourself together and sort your act out at long last. How many signs do you need that you've got to get serious about doing this? And it's not to say that there can't be a good relationship with the United States in future. There may be a time after Trump that things will change again. But in the meantime, it's just absolutely incredible. And this is a problem that, and I'm very pro-European, very pro-European Union. But this is where the European Union is unbelievably weak at getting its act together on this score.
Well, let's, talk about this whole, EU-American relations after Trump, because I think it's based on the assumption that as soon as Trump leaves, everybody goes back to normal. It's this pre-Trumpian, relationship. I don't think, first of all, that presupposes that Vance will not just simply take over, or sort of the Trump attitude of the Republican Party will not continue. And I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in many of Europe's leaders right now. I'm sorry, I just don't. The only one that might have some degree of autonomy decision making is Macron, and that's not saying much. There was this realization shortly after the Vance statement at the NATO Munich Security Summit last year, or was it beginning? No, it was this year.
I know. Gosh, seems like.
Sometimes it seems like it's like 6 months into Trump's second presidency, and it seems like they're already 3 years in. No, but the realization was, wake up call, guys. You need to, develop a more independent foreign policy. You need to be much more assertive in your own political decision making and not keep looking to Washington. And I don't know how many wake-up calls Brussels is going to need before they get it through their heads. If there is some kind of agreement between Trump and Putin, if nothing else, that gives Trump all the more reason to continue to disregard the EU as little more than I'll CC you on the on the minutes that I've typed up, and have Vance send them out to you. You can maybe give me your feedback one way or the other, but you weren't invited to the big boy party.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. By the way, just to show that we are keeping an eye on the post. Isol, I see that you posted it. He doesn't agree. He thinks Europeans are still seeking autonomy. They just need more time. Look, I think there is certainly an understanding, but my sense is that the debate goes off the boil, and you're dealing with a Europe that needs to have a truly concerted sense of purpose in order to get big things done. And I think that the danger that we have here is that it was looking that way. There was that sense of purpose. That's disappeared now. And without that sense of purpose, you're going to end up in a very, very different place. Pyotr, I'm really not sure what's going on.
We have some good ASMR background music here.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's happened there. He's gone off, maybe to tell. So I think, look, I can see the argument that maybe that Europe needs more time. I agree. It's certainly not going to be done overnight, and it was never going to be done overnight. But having watched the European Union for as long as I have, the concern I have, as I say, is this real sense that, without keeping it top of the political agenda, without European leaders really talking about it, one gets the sense that this is a huge undertaking, political undertaking for Europe to have that strategic autonomy. And there is just really a sense that that's not happening. It's gone off the boil, and unless it is on the boil, it's just not going to happen in the way that it needs to happen, and it's just going to leave Europe open to Trump blackmail time and time and time again.
Mm-hmm. Another thing about the larger study of conflict resolution here is it's not really something that's etched in scholarly law. but it's something that's pretty apparent. And I teach this when I'm offering my course on conflict resolution. And that is probably inconvenient truth number one. Reality is dictated by the most insane person in the room. And Trump does a very good job of being that insane person. He is the one that dictates reality. You may not like him. You may think that he's absolutely unqualified, but everybody's talking about him. Everybody responds to what he does. And you said something earlier about his erratic behavior. One moment he wants to sanction Russia. Another moment he wants to talk with Russia. You know, what had happened there? My guess is that he first was threatening to sanction a tariff, right? A number of countries like Brazil and India and, you know, coming soon, China. And they all stood their ground. They all said, you know, do whatever you want. We're not, you know, India, I will continue to buy oil and gas from Russia. Brazil, you know, I'm not going to, you know, be subject to your blackmail. Mexico says the same thing. And what's interesting is that these countries are now coming closer and closer together as far as their...
Sorry, Michael, I have to interject, mate. I'm just going to make a couple of points. Sorry, Michael, I want to interject. Andre, mate, if you have a problem, email me. I'm getting quite offended with your comments. I can't help the music. You're lucky enough to have a stream because I am the one who organizes it and hosts it. These two gentlemen join me because I know what I'm talking about. We all do. Okay, so constantly picking on me because my phone notifications, that isn't me. Nor is it my fault with the music, okay? I've come to Greece and we weren't sure we were going to do a stream at all. You're lucky we're doing one. So stop insulting me by saying that I'm trying to sabotage the stream on behalf of Russia. I may be half Russian, but I vehemently hate Putin's regime, and I will not stand to be smeared by people like you who don't know who I am and don't know half the work that I do and have done on behalf of Ukraine, but also in a professional capacity, okay? I might be younger and have less qualifications than these two gentlemen, but I damn well know what I'm talking about, and I will not be talked to like that by you. So thank you very much. I'm sorry, Michael, and I will also interject. This isn't a monologue, okay? We're here to talk about things with each other, audience, okay? So if Michael has a point that I disagree with, I'm going to interject. James does it, Michael does it, we all do it, okay? If you can't handle that, then maybe go back and learn how to debate, because that's something that people in professional circles in academia actually do. It's called international relations and diplomacy, okay? So sorry for that slight interjection there, Michael, but I'm getting quite fed up with people insulting me.
No, and Andre has since
about these things, right? I might not want to mention it, James, but I think it's important, and I'm not going to hold my tongue for fear of repercussions. I think people need to learn how to appreciate the fact that we go to a lot of bloody work to host these live streams and do these shows. Okay, James might have his style, which people prefer, but my style is my style, and I know what I'm talking about. We have very similar opinions, which if we didn't, then we wouldn't host. And James wouldn't do it with me if he didn't think I knew what I was doing and I was a stand-up person, or trying to be. And equally for Michael. So sorry, but that's
no. Listen, you know, the fact that we have open comments just kind of, you know, leads the, you know, opens the floodgates to everyone and everything. As I was saying before, reality being dictated by the most insane person, you know, in the room. Yeah, I forget what I was finishing up with. I guess what I was saying was that we respond quite frequently to Trump's erratic behavior. I think the idea, I remember what I was saying, is that his attempt at issuing tariffs on India resulted in Modi now organizing a trip to China to, what I would imagine, continue, solidify further economic relations between the two countries. So, of course, the minute that we get this agreement between Trump and Putin meeting, the media goes into its own narrative. Either Trump scared Putin and Putin wants to make a deal with Trump because Trump is awesome. The other one is that, you know, Trump barked and Putin laughed, and now they're trying to save face. And at the end of the day, I think that the agreement, if there is an agreement, whatever meeting comes out in the next couple of days is going to be far less climactic than many, would, suspect. If nothing else, it just simply gives them an opportunity to continue dialogue and, continue to work behind the scenes. There, end story.
No, I agree 100%, Michael. I wanted to raise that as well. This is a huge risk for Trump because he is pushing Modi towards China. I mean, not completely. Let's not get too carried away with sort of a pivot to China, but the amount of work that the Indo-US relationship has been going under in the past few years as China's been getting more, antagonistic, belligerent with its near abroad. I think Trump's overzealousness, if that's the right word, in the context of Ukraine and Russia is alienating India. Trump is so desperate for some kind of peace deal in Ukraine or over Ukraine, partially because I think his reputation is residing on it so much that he worries, if he doesn't deliver something, then it's going to happen. But it's that weaponization again of the US economy towards countries that are strategically autonomous. The Indians are the most, I think, important geostrategic partner the US has globally because of how much they counterbalance China in so many other spheres, right? Even in the Middle East, the US and India have that I2U2 pact with the Emiratis and Israel, and the Indians are very important for that, and Quad obviously. So I think that this is a huge again, I'm not going to go too far and say that's it, but I do think that there's a problem here that Trump could get so far in with his economics and the tariffs and everything, the secondary tariffs. I mean, this is why I don't think you've ever seen many US presidents use secondary sanctions, because it's a very slippery slope. If you're going to start sanctioning countries because of their relationship to primary actor, it's.
I'm going to push back a little on this one because I look again. I have no idea what Trump really is up to, but I think that there is also a quid pro quo in all of this, that India also has been looking to United States and other allies against China. I mean, the whole confusion that it's part of the BRICS and yet it has this strange relationship with Beijing. But at the same time, I mean, Modi can't decide that he wants the West in one way, but in other ways will completely ignore Western concerns over Russia. And for many Europeans and certainly for the Biden administration, the Ukraine war was an important issue. And, they wanted to isolate Russia. Russia is violating international law by what it's doing in Ukraine. And yet one of the key factors keeping Russia afloat was the fact that India was buying shed ton of oil from Russia and taking up the slack where Europe and others had left off. So I think there is a good reason to say to India that, look, if we're trying to maneuver now, I don't happen to believe that what Trump is trying to do with Ukraine is going to be in any way beneficial. But however one feels about it, if you're trying to maneuver Russia into a position where you want it, you want it to sign up to some sort of peace agreement, then the fact that it was being given a lifeline by India buying all this oil was certainly not helpful. Mm-hmm. And as I say, the fact that, fine, India, if you want to chuck your lot in with Russia and China, then that's your business. But
James, can I ask you a question on that? Because I think what's interesting is, obviously, India's in a tricky situation ever since the war in Ukraine fully occurred. India's been pretty worried about the quality of Russian equipment, right? And I think they've been buying more US advanced tech, but not completely. So what options does that have for India in terms of if they want to and Russia?
Sorry, I lost you there.
So what do you think that means for India?
No, so I lost you for a sec there, just on that. But look, we're living in a world where we're having to make some choices about, where do your alliances stand? And I know that you will have a lot of Indian nationalists who say, we will just do what's right for India. All right, fine. But the trouble is, if you pursue that policy, then you end up being trusted by no one. you don't make alliances, you don't make friends. And some would say, oh, well, but national interest countries don't have friends, they have interests and everything like that. All right, take that realist position. But that's not the reality of how this world works. If you want countries to have your back, if you need them, you need to be working with them and showing a realization of their concerns. And I think that this is a really, really good example of where India is failing, that it's on this, we're great, we're doing wonderfully, we don't need anyone else, we will just do what's right for India, fine. But if you need people to be helping you, if you want other countries to be helping you, then you've actually got to be showing some sort of, recognition of their concerns and working with them. And I think, in that regard, I think that it was right to put more pressure. I think Europe should have also been putting more pressure on India over this issue of support for Russia. It's an important issue, and it's not just a European issue. This is, as I've said time and time again, what we are seeing in Ukraine is much, much greater than Ukraine. It is setting the agenda for world politics, for a substantial part of this century.
Yes.
And India is absolutely undermining international law at the moment. And it's a country that says that it respects international law, that it likes to abide by it, and yet is doing one of the single most important acts to undermine that by buying up all this Russian oil. So I on this issue, I think that Trump, I understand the concerns people have about secondary sanctions, but I think that it's been a long time coming. I think, a lot of people have been saying, and not just for India, for a lot of other countries, if you want to help Moscow out, well, you're going to have to be open with it, and I hope that it takes up the slack on your economy, because there will be a price to pay if you want to go ahead and do this. I mean, there are a lot of other countries. I think more steps could be taken against Central Asia for effectively sanctions busting, tightening things up on there. But anyway, I mean, we might find that by the end of the week, this is all moot, because if Trump suddenly announced he's done a great deal with Putin and is going to start opening up business to America, then it's game over in many ways, I have to say.
Right, but provided that you can actually enforce these threats. I mean, you were talking about sanctioning India, sanctioning Central Asian countries. I mean, by who? The European Union? European Union fawns over Trump just to, make it look like the relationship, the transatlantic relationship, is still harmonious. I mean, this is one of the big flaws of liberalism, the IR theory liberalism, not the political ideology. And that is, liberalism works if and only if all states in a system agree to work by the given rules of the game. And when there are defectors, everybody defaults back to realism, right? Hence, reality is dictated by the most insane person or most, unstable, unpredictable state in the world. And, we've been talking about Russia, Ukraine. We've been talking about, India and BRICS and Armenia, Azerbaijan. We're talking about international law and countries that are chiding India allegedly for breaking international law. And yet we have not mentioned once Israel and Palestine. I want to talk about international law that's being broken. I mean, Israel is committing war crime after war crime. And these very countries that are chiding Russia seem to be turning blind eye and deaf ear. And this isn't whataboutism, and this isn't trying to take a sleight of hand here, but, calling something illegal needs to be applied across the board. European Union countries are going to absolutely defend Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity while maintaining embassies in Pristina. So, this does not all of a sudden throw the liberalism argument out. It doesn't mean that international law is now moot, but it also raises many, many issues about when do we apply this? When do we feel like we need to make a moral stand? And when do national interests take it? It's always interesting how national interests and the greater universal good, tend to be at odds at times. It's, the more powerful the country happens to be.
My God, and I listen, I agree. Look, I mean, regulars will know that my position is essentially that, I believe in a system of international law and stability. And I think, we've moved dangerously far from it. I think maybe we've moved beyond it entirely. But if there is any way back to it, then we've got to be sort of finding a way to sort of reinvigorate multilateralism, respect for international law. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there are a lot of people who are saying that, it's all very well lecturing other countries for, engaging with Russia, but, where is Europe engaging, and taking steps against Israel? I think the French decision on recognition of Palestine is an important step on this. I think that sort of Britain and Canada staying their position. I mean, the reality is, though, that I'm not sure what it'll do in any tangible sense. I mean, I think, as somebody who works on recognition, I'd say, it has a symbolic importance, but recognition is important because it opens the door to actual practical actions. And the question is, what are those practical actions going to be? But I think, the point I'm making before anyone sort of jumps up and says, oh, but you've just been anti-Indian or whatever. No, the point I'm saying is that India is a country that says that it respects international law and believes in multilateralism. If that's the case, then what it is doing with Russia is a fundamental step against that. Of course, I'm not going to one moment say that Trump is actually, is a great defender of the international rules-based order. He quite clearly isn't. We are dealing with all sorts of complexity, and this is where I particularly feel the absence of Europe, that it just cannot seem to get itself together to be the voice of saying, look, and it used to be really good at this. It used to, I mean, it had all its weaknesses, but, there was this sort of, in the IR literature, there was this whole talk of what was called normative power Europe at one point. You don't really hear a lot of it these days, but it was a very, very powerful thing about 20 years ago, which was actually saying that Europe actually had tremendous influence to get countries to sign up to a rules-based international order and to respect international law, and that this was its great strength, and that it just doesn't seem to have that anymore. I don't know whether it's just simply having to respond to the complexity of the world that we're living in, but I really, really do think that it needs to find that again and bring countries on. It should not be difficult to persuade countries that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is utterly detrimental to everyone's interests. And if it's allowed to stand, and if we get into a world where territorial borders are shifted in that way, and that countries can simply annex parts of neighboring countries, this is the sort of thing that it should be the easiest thing in the world to be persuading African, Asian countries, and especially with the economic clout that Europe and the United States has. And yet it just doesn't seem to be working in that way.
I think that you mentioned something almost in passing before, which I think is the crux of this entire conversation, and that is it's not Ukraine anymore. Ukraine is the catalyst upon which I think the new multipolar world is going to reflect, and it's not just Ukraine. It's Ukraine, it's Palestine. It's smaller countries that are moved around like bargaining chips for greater power politics. Will we resume some collective adherence to international law? It's funny how Russia will quote the UN Charter chapter and verse when it is seeking to explain its actions. At the end of the day, Russia is doing what is in Russia's interest. The United States is doing what's in America's interest. I mean, national interest will always take precedence over the greater good, unless you think that our national interests are the greater good of the world. Let's see. I mean, I don't know, what to make of the future of, let's say, the BRICS organization. It's primarily an economic organization. We're not talking about political. We're not talking about legal. But we are talking about how the poles of power are now moving out of Europe. Europe is sort of becoming a legacy more than anything else.
But I can't say that I'm particularly confident that BRICS is the future in any way.
No. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that BRICS is going to, replace. No. Don't get me wrong on that. I mean,
I was about to say, by the way, in my comments, there's somebody sort of saying there is no international laws. There's only American law until BRICS becomes strong enough. James is living in a delusion. So user number. The reality is that, if you think that the BRICS are going to create a new order of international law, I mean, so let's get away from this idea that international law is a Western construct anyway. It isn't. It's an international construct, and it has always been. The Soviet Union was a member of the Security Council. It could veto resolutions it didn't like. So that idea, I think we have to be really careful about. That it was something that was created. Things like Universal Declaration of Human Rights had the Soviet Union buy into it. It had, it's not as simplistic as saying it's Western law. But the idea that you can deconstruct that international law now in the way that Putin is doing, and then say, right, look at the members of BRICS and tell me with any seriousness that, anyone can be confident that this is, one, going to lead to effective unified decision making, because it's laughable, because the countries are so utterly different from each other and they don't share any values. The only values that seem to link the BRICS is varying degrees, and I have to emphasize, of skepticism about the West. That's it. And it's not like they're all united against the West. You've got lots of countries there which are quite happily, to have good relations with the West in one context, and then sort of jump on the thing and say, you know what, I wouldn't mind actually having quite good relations with it, with China, so I'll join the BRICS. To be on that. But, I just don't see, and, people are talking about a single BRICS currency. No. I mean, whose currency? What currency that can manage and integrate in the way that the euro can work across Europe? And even there, you see the pressures of very, very different economies. And those European economies are far, far closer than the economies of sort of India, China, Israel, South Africa, Ethiopia, Iran, all the countries which have signed up to the BRICS. So,
but BRICS
is a bit of a pipe dream.
Well, BRICS more than anything else right now is not looking to replace the UN. I mean, as far as at least some of their more outspoken leaders are concerned, is to just give more teeth to the UN, which is a whole new separate topic about, how the UN can be reformed, if it can be reformed. We've talked about this.
I'd like to see that. I'd like to see a return to an effective UN based on international law, and we have to accept that there's a whole bunch of issues that have to be tackled in order to do that. So Russia and Ukraine is one of them, and Israel Palestine is another one, but there are others as well. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that.
Sure. Michael. So I don't know. We've been sort of chatting back and forth here for about an hour. Anything else you want to?
Well, no. I think it's sort of, we've covered Armenia-Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, Pyotr has had a few technical problems this time round, so I think he's probably off the stream for now. But it will be an interesting week ahead. Just as we tend to do, a big up on the channels. What have you been doing recently on your channel? Anything that you'd like to highlight?
It's been quiet. The translations are still coming, although at this point it is pretty much the same narrative. I imagine that by next week there will certainly be a press conference in Alaska between Putin and Trump. I still adhere to the old ways of, providing the subtitles with the original Russian. I know that there's a lot of channels out there that now do the AI voiceovers, and they're able to get those things out there much, much faster. I don't know about you. I think that that's just absolutely mechanical, and I think that it's disingenuous. So I prefer the original voices with the original intonations. It takes time. It definitely takes time to do. Other than that, I mean, I'm about 2-3 weeks away from the start of the fall semester. I'll be teaching 7 undergraduate courses at 4 universities. So I will be, have syllabus. Yes, the wandering academic here have syllabus will teach. Giving myself just a little calm before the storm here.
This is the thing, I've done a fair bit of teaching in the US system myself, and I'm always struck at how early US universities go back, because British universities, it's not till sort of mid-late September, if not sometimes early October.
But
in the States, I mean, you're back in about a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Yeah. So Labor Day, and that's when the bulk of my classes will, will begin. So, I will, in the meantime, I will try to be, active as I am on my channel. Obviously continue the streaming with you two, among others, and a lot of things are in the pipe work. So let's see where the Armenian Azerbaijan thing. Let's see where the Russia U.S. talks go. Let's see what the reaction is going to be, and let's see if there is any forward movement, or if one thing that is at least coming through the Telegram channels was that the idea is that Trump is willing to give Putin Crimea and the Donbass in exchange for everything else, and Russia has somehow rolled back its demands, to which the Kremlin has said, no, that's a misunderstanding. Our positions have not changed since June of 2024. So stay tuned is really all that I can say.
All right. No, Pyotr, we're just doing a quick discussion on news on what we've been doing on our channels. Michael had just said something. I'm just going to quick big up on two things. So if anyone is interested in Central Asia, and I think this is something that, Michael, you might be, I had a great chat the other day with Michael Hilliard from the Red Line podcast, talking about Central Asia. So anyone's interested in sort of a breakdown of those 5 countries and just how different they are from each other. And yep. Something actually, Michael, I should also bring you on sometime to have a chat about Central Asia. But it's a fascinating interview.
Let's do it.
So that's good. And one that I just did on Friday, a bit of a different one, but I think interesting, is, and it might have gone, a few people probably wasn't top of the news agenda, but the Dalai Lama just had his 90th birthday. And there's a very, very interesting question to be had about what happens in terms of succession. How will his successor be appointed, selected? There's a big dispute sort of brewing about that, and it's a very interesting. Tibet is a situation a lot of people have heard about, but actually don't really know in much detail what it's all about. But this whole question about the Dalai Lama is absolutely central to any discussion about Tibet. So if anyone's interested in finding out a little bit about the history of Tibet and why this issue is quite so significant, take a look at my video from Friday. So that's my one. Pyotr, what have you been up to recently?
What have I been up to? Well, right now I've been trying to find a more stable connection, and I actually have a sufficient one. So here we go. We can actually have the stream now, everybody.
So the last hour was just the warm up. That was it.
Yeah, that's all irrelevant. All unimportant. No, of course not. But the thing about my channel, which is different, is that I do travel a lot. So I do trend. What you will see if you watch my videos is often a very different background. And like yourself, James, I encourage people to check out James's podcasts, because he started doing them. We've talked about it a lot, haven't we, James? Right? I started my channel with the podcast thing, but I'm doing more of my own analysis like you, and you've sort of adopted what I was doing with interviewing more guests. You had Richard Go and my former colleague of Crisis Group on about the UN, which was really good. But yeah, I've had Martin Wald of the Financial Times. I will be hosting Christopher Miller, the Ukraine editor for the FT, as well at the end of August. And I will be in Cyprus in a couple of weeks. And I think there's going to be a bit of a surprise. I won't say more than that, but there may be those of you who enjoy watching some of our collaborations. There may be a big, particularly special one coming up in a couple of weeks. So I will give a big, sort of foreshadowing to that. What I love about these streams as well is that we have very different views. James's polished delivery, Michael's impassioned, and my messy contributions, shall we say, rough around the edges. But just a couple of things also, because we've gone from India to BRICS and all this. BRICS I've vacillated on so much in the past few years, thinking, it is actually more of a thing. But I've come back around to thinking it's not really anything. It's something, but it's something because people have taken it and giving it more meaning than it actually has in terms of substance. What I mean by that is that it lacks a constitution, for one, or some kind of treaty. The countries themselves, the bigger it gets, the more opinions you have to consider. And so that obviously makes it more bureaucratic and slower. And therefore, what set it apart, its original nimbleness, is being lost. And to be honest, I've always seen it as more China and co, right? China gives more than 45-50% of the overall financial budget contributions to the Asian Development Bank than the others. South Africa's given, I think, not even 10 billion. India has given a fraction. Russia has tried to use it as some kind of ideological movement. But as we've seen with the Siberia 2 pipeline across Russia, China and Russia have their very big limitations. And I really think BRICS is being increasingly dried up. And to bring it back round to what you both were saying about Central Asia, I personally think that the SCO, or Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is where to focus more of your attention in terms of institutional leverage, right? I think it has more substance to it, more meat on the bones than BRICS ever has had. And I think what's going to be very interesting to see is what happens in BRICS over the Saudi Arabian efforts with France to recognize Palestine. We've touched upon it with Israeli commentary and the double standards between Ukraine and Israel and those sorts of things. I was listening to you guys earlier. So I think that it's going to be quite a challenge to see how BRICS remains as relevant. But when it comes to this meeting with Trump and Putin, just to sort of tie it all in the bow, for me personally, I think that I'm a strategic idealist first and foremost, in the sense of longer term. I would like to see Ukraine in its 1991 borders with all of what is originally its territory. But in the short to medium term, I find it very difficult to see how realistic that is, just because I don't trust Trump. Putin is, he's going to use up every possible man he can, every possible person in Russia he can, to try to put that pressure on it. And also because of the inconsistency of the EU. I do think that they are doing more, but there's always a lag time effect in terms of the policies coming through. We've got the Patriots promise for next year, but even then there's going to be legal and bureaucratic, I think, delays with that. So for me, my biggest concern is that Trump and Putin, they get in that room, they're in person, as you know, James, and maybe you, Michael, as well, if you've done diplomacy. As soon as you're in the room with the people, it doesn't matter how much you talk about things through statements or phone calls. As soon as you're in the room, that's why the UN, I think, is so underappreciated for the role that it has. Things change. And I really think that as soon as those two men are in the same room together, if Putin does actually turn up, because some people think he won't, I think it's going to be a problem. I think it's going to be a risky situation for Ukraine. I'm very worried that they'll, just go behind Ukraine's back and make some kind of nasty deal, which will, the Europeans will be like, we don't accept this, and then we'll be back at square one. So I like to believe in the best, but unfortunately, as we know in realpolitik and stuff, prepare for the worst. So there's my eclectic sort of late last minute contributions. What's coming up on the channel, lots of more things. We should do these live streams, I think, at least once a month, and band together to talk about lots of different things. Lots to think about, I think, as well in the next few weeks, vis-a-vis Gaza and Israel as well. And just Europe. I think Europe is facing a situation with the economy. So we'll reconvene though, and I look forward to lots to come. And do check out all their channels, guys. But thanks very much for joining us. Apologies for my technical issues, but glad we got it sorted somehow. And we'll see you all next time.
All good.
Your stay in Greece, Pyotr.
Yeah.